Now we are going to begin with talking about the former president, like I said earlier, the founder of the Fourth Republic, and which is the most enduring republic that Ghana has enjoyed as a democracy. We will be speaking to people who are close to him, who were close to him, and those who followed the era since May 1979 and to June 4, 79 of the AFRC, to September 1979, and the years that followed. 31st December 1981, and the democratic era as a civilian president. What has been his achievements that are worth celebrating? I'm sure you observed some of that in the tributes that poured when he was being laid to rest. Let's first get on the phone lines and speak to a man who was his aide for so many years. All right, so let's first listen and watch this.
Rawlings, who read the tribute on behalf of her mother, said the late president's gifts of sharing knew no bounds.
With the birth of our first child, your care and concern knew no bounds, as you would spend all morning cleaning the house and doing all manner of chores before setting off for work, so I could rest and see to the baby. You took pride in your fatherly duties. There was no task too tiresome or bothersome for you, as you sought to take care of your young family. The scarcity of goods in the country at the time made things so difficult for everyone, and so you decided to name our daughter Zaneto, which meant, let the darkness end. The next few months had me in a constant state of fear, as you were arrested countless times by the military intelligence, culminating in the historic trial after the May 15th uprising. Life after June 4th, 1979 was never laid back. It was a roller coaster, and to quote Iris Helseden, but then our path grew steep and rough and clouds obscured the sun. As problems raised their worried heads, we indeed lost our sense of fun. But love was there through troubled times to ease the hurt away.
So that's an excerpt from the final funeral rites and burial of President Jerry John Rawlings. Let's get on the phone lines and speak to start with Kofi Adams. Kofi Adams was his aide for so many years. Good morning. Thank you for joining us, Kofi.
Thompson, and good morning to your listeners and viewers.
Right. And Kofi Adams is now the MP for the Boem constituency. Now, for how many years were you aide to President Rawlings?
Let me just cut it to the senior aide level when I was his spokesperson. That was 8+ years.
Right. What is it that you can say about the man Rawlings and his legacy, having worked so close with him?
I must say something, that President Rawlings was truly a complete man when it comes to legacy. He had a legacy for family. There's a legacy for friends and comrades, and there's legacy for the country. In all spheres, you will find President Rawlings in there. That he is not limited in any way to just family, to just friends, or to country. you find him everywhere that he has left a mark. And clearly, if we want to look at it from very national perspective, whether we accept it or not, no matter how much we will try to turn around and say, the fourth Republican constitutional democracy that we have today as a country will very much be credited to him, as we do for Nkrumah, for our independence. We will credit Jerry Rawlings for the fourth Republican constitutional democracy that we have today. That is the first thing we can look at if we want to look at the national picture. Then below that,
well, Kofi, to have even President Akufo-Addo say without any hesitation that Jerry Rawlings is the founder of the Fourth Republic, that's it. But give us a bit of a peek into who you knew him to be before we move on to the issues of monuments that will stand in his name as legacy.
Thank you, Samson. You see, one clear thing that people didn't know about President Rawlings, which most of us who were close to him knew, is his love for nature and environment. That translated to his love for mankind. And as I start most times to analyze the man Rawlings and why he loves people the way he does, then answers kept popping up that look at how he loves nature, how he loves the environment. Truly, we are told God created nature and environment for the goodness of mankind. He did all these beautiful things, the mountains, the water body, the trees, the animals, all those things. He did them to make the life of mankind so beautiful. And so if you have a human being who loves such things, then you can immediately see his love for mankind. So President Rawlings was one person who got moved by pain. He truly would never want to see people going through pain. And so you can now appreciate why long before he got to the scene, he will name the first daughter Zanetop. So you can now go into and see the belief. People today, now that he's gone, will take their time and understand some of the things that he did. Zanetop, there was something happening at that time. He thought that it must stop. What will be his contribution to keeping that in his mind constantly is to name the first child. So that even within their small home environment, he is very much informed that something that is going bad, that is wrong, must stop. That is what moved him all through his work, whether as chairman of PNDC, as leader of NDC and president of the Republic, and post his tenure as a former president and, of course, an elder statesman. He never minced words when he has to speak about anything that is wrong. Whether something, it even affected his own organization, the NDC, that is not what he's looking at. He's looking at what I'm speaking. Is it true? Will he help uplift the nation? Will he pull us closer to values that gives respect to human being, whether old or young, to human being, human nature? Will we do good and right to ourselves and our country? That is what informed him.
Yeah.
Not whether
People
I am
said,
this or I am that.
people said he was this your very tough man, and clearly it is seen through some of his actions in running the country for almost 20 good years. How he came onto the scene in 1979, some of us didn't have the privilege of getting to experience the period. By then, I think I was just about some 3-4 years. But in 2010, when he was a AU envoy to Somalia, and there was famine in Somalia, which was declared by the UN, as an emergency situation, he was speaking to the CNN about it. He had gone there himself to see how the Somalis were suffering, how children, were stunted, and he, in that interview with the CNN, the global news network, broke down and was weeping. That day, I felt it, that there's a human side to him. We have heard, is it Victor Smith? We are being told somebody who was very close to him says that he had witnessed him crying like a baby. From where you sit, looking at it through this lens, what would you say of him? Was he, as some may have thought, that he may have been reckless or heartless to some extent in some of the things that he's perceived to have been, the way he did some of the things he did?
Samson, thank you for some of these issues that you brought up. The Somalia incident that you mentioned was things that happened in my presence, because at that time I was his spokesperson. Okay. Myself and Kobnando were the ones who were managing the Somalia project. And long before him, others who have been appointed to try to assist in such situations will want to stay away. But President Rawlings insisted that if he has to do anything to help in the situation, he needed to be on the ground. Mm. He didn't fear that it could result in him being killed going to that level. All he wanted was to be able to assess the situation himself. Let those who are engaged in that have a certain feel and see if we can get them to reach some kind of consensus. He wanted to meet the political actors. He wanted to meet the women groups. He wanted to meet the traditional leaders. He wanted to meet them separately and bring them together on the ground, not only away from Somalia. And I believe that at the end of the day, he made very strong recommendations to AU that, to a large extent, have helped, if not completely, resolve the situation in reaching this far that we have reached with the Somalia situation. President Rawlings has been accused for many things. And for some of them, if you ask, they will tell you, oh, soldiers came and did this. Soldiers came and did that. It is true that when you have a revolution such as we had in 81, and even before then, the AFRC, some people will take the law into their own hands. Today, even in our constitutional democratic dispensation, we have situations where people take the law into their own hands. But thank God for social media and other means of communicating, sometimes we are able to capture some of these incidents and report them. So it enables the leadership to immediately follow up. But you can imagine in 79, you can imagine in 81, 82, 83, how are you going to even capture an incident for it to be able to reach the leadership, for them to react or act almost immediately? Sometimes it may not even be known to leadership for a very long time to come. Instances that came to his attention. Just look at how many of them were investigated and dealt with. Mention of the murder of the judges and then the army officer. This was immediately investigated. People who at least were found guilty faced a maximum punishment, including someone who supposed to have been so close to him that at that time he would have thought, like, let me save even the person, if truly he really wished to do so. But
if you could,
the maximum punishment.
Kofi, if you could at this time tell us in summary what you would say are his biggest legacies. And whilst we talk about legacies, of course, people will be pointing to rural electrification and all of that. If there's anything beyond a monument that you can call a legacy, and also beyond the Fourth Republic, please, quickly, let's talk about that.
I think, Samson, those things of monuments, infrastructure, and all that are things we can all see and raise. But for me, one thing I would always remember him for is the empathy that he had for fellow beings, and the fact that he taught us never to shy away from speaking truth and speaking to power where we have to. For me, these are things that really ring in my mind. As for the big things about whether it is healthcare infrastructure, whether it is laws that tackled some major infractions in our society, like, for example, the interstate succession laws that were passed during the PNDC time to save many of our women and children, where if you lost your father or your husband without any will, the next moment is that you are even thrown away. Kids' education, meal. That law came to save a lot of persons. Those things are there. We will see them. Extension of water to many communities, eradication of all kinds of water-related diseases, educational infrastructure, educational reforms that made education so accessible to people, even in communities where they would not have thought of sending their kids to secondary education. All those things are there. But the intangibles that he made us feel that we can challenge, we can believe in this, let's stand for truth, that you can serve as a leader for so long and still live in your country without running away to any place. Okay. You can serve as a leader, and when it is time for you to bow out, you don't need to do anything to stay on. 52 years old, he left office and stayed here till he's dead.
All right.
52. Many would have amended the constitution to stay on.
All right. Anyway, he himself acknowledged that anybody who thought that he had any idea to stay on for a day longer after his 8-year tenure had come, they were wrong, because he knew,
was completely wrong.
Yeah, he said he knew clearly that anything like that would have meant he would lose the support of the people.
All the institutions he has helped build over the period.
All right.
We're building a democracy. Would have been destroyed by just that action.
Right. Well, despite the fact that he was, people would say, a reluctant Democrat, he was very clear about it from the very start. There are some older people who get to tell us stories about the time he came on the scene and how, when he was court-martialed on the 15th of May, 1979, the opportunity where he spoke about the fact that he was not an expert in law, he was not an expert in economy, but he was an expert in walking hungry and thinking about the next meal. People have told us stories about that time, how you would find only one single person in an entire market being the only person who has control and charge over Gary
commodity.
Yes, over Gary, common Gary. There are those who have told the stories where you couldn't find even soap. You know, you couldn't find toothpaste. So I suppose that there are many who recognize all of these. Thank you for your time, Kofi Adams.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Right. Now, let's speak to Colonel Festus B. Abuaje, retired, who is author, conflict analyst, consultant, and adjunct member, Center on Democratic Transitions, Ghana. Thank you very much for joining us, Colonel Abuaje. I think you need to unmute.
Thanks for having me, and my compliments to the panelists in the studio.
Right. Thank you very much.
Who just spoke.
Right.
That I've never met in life, but I've heard so much about.
Yes. I remember those days we heard him speak and people kept saying, how does this guy manage to speak for President Rawlings? He's difficult to manage. He and Victor Smith. I remember how Victor Smith got sacked by, is it his own text message? You know, very interesting times. But what do you remember of Jerry Rawlings, and what would you want him to be remembered for?
Well, I think a lot has been said across several disciplines: the economy, the politics, human relations, international relations, and so on and so forth. But not much, I believe, has been discussed about his role and contribution across different dimensions or levels of security. That's what I think I want to touch on. Well, the man that we call JJ or JJ Rawlings, I think will be stuck in everybody's mind to start with. In theory, he was a coup maker. In our history as a nation, he's about the only one who has not come once, not twice, but if you like, 3 times, and stayed on during the 3rd time for as long as, you know, the conditions allowed. And I think that is the basis from which we need to discuss his contribution. Many of us who are alive, I heard you say that you were quite a young boy. But when I had returned from the Middle East in 1979, or let's say 1981, the soldiers of 2BN said that, in fact, there were a number of officers who were not wanted in their units by soldiers. And I happened to be one of them who was not wanted by the soldiers of 2BN. So I was posted away to Kumasi, where we used to have the boys' company or the junior leaders' company as an instructor. That school is no more. Jerry had the courage to use our military term to under-implement that school, because a lot of the difficulties that he had, granted that he was a coup maker, once his coup had succeeded, it had become legitimate. But there were a number of attempts, counter-coups and counter-revolutions, to get rid of him. And some of the elements involved were fine boys, fine soldiers. The boys' company, you took boys at the age of about 14 and a half, took them to the school, grilled them in military discipline for 3 years. So at the age of about 17 and a half, you turned them out. And the best amongst them were graduated as lance corporals. But some of the very fine senior NCOs that the Ghana Armed Forces has produced came from that school. Unfortunately, or incidentally, they were also the activists within, among his own group, and then against his group. He had the courage to under-implement the school, close it down. And since then, we have one policy which says that every soldier entering the Ghana Armed Forces must go through the Armed Forces Recruit and Training Center, which is currently at Shah Hills. And I think that must go to his credit. But I should mention here that, you see, a lot has been said about him, but you've mentioned Ambassador Victor Smith. We've just heard Mr. Kofi Adams, and I saw on another platform, E.T. Menson. In the domain that I want to talk about, the successes that he achieved owe to how he imaginatively, synergized the relations or the synergies between security, be it national or domestic, be it regional, be it international, and foreign policy. And here, the team that I think many of us would remember is a gentleman that we hardly hear about these days, but he's still alive. Captain Kojo Chikata. I mean, a name that, instilled fear in some of us or many of us, and at the same time, commanded your respect. That deep thinking, gentleman. And of course, General Notqueno, that some Ghanaians, for whatever reasons, have not sat down to analyze the circumstances in which he found himself in the middle of these coups and so on. Then, of course, on the foreign relations side, the Honorable Obed Asamoah, for instance, Ambassador Victor Gbeho, then my own senior at Prempeh College, Commander Asasi Jima. And I think we shouldn't forget about Mr. Totobi Kwachi. And another name that these days we don't hear much about, Michael Susidis, that I met only once when I launched my ECOMOG book in 2018. Okay. And of course, I should mention W1 Tete. Some, if not all, the successes that he achieved arose from in the domain of security and its relations with international politics and so on, from these people that I've mentioned. I think Rawlings has already gone down in history, by masterfully being able to blend, as I've said, domestic security, regional security, and the management of complex humanitarian emergencies, whether in Ghana as we had it in the early 80s, when the economy was in dire straits, when you needed to queue over days in order to find a gallon of fuel, of course, which was being rationed. And then the regional, conflicts that were raging in the ECOWAS region. I think how he successfully managed to contain the counter coups must also go down in history. Because here he was contending with very powerful players in the international community. And there are records, Obed Asamoah has mentioned that in his books, The Political History of Ghana, the involvement of the CIA, the MI6, and France and Israel, and so on and so forth, were behind the series of coups and counter coups that he was able to contain. And of course, we need to mention that CIA, France, US, whatever, don't fly drones into Ghana. They need conduits. They need safe havens. At the time, all our neighbors, without exception, Togo, Cote d'Ivoire, Burkina Faso, were in the camp of these foreign actors in order to get rid of the Rawlings regime that they rightly, with their masters in the international community, thought that was a threat, if you like, to democracy and so on and so forth. So at the end of the day, I think it's just been said, we must credit J.J. Rawlings with the kind of democratic consolidation that we keep touting that we have achieved over 28 years.
Yeah, beyond the shores of Ghana, I have heard international security experts talk about a role that he played beyond Ghana. But are you in a position to help us appreciate that a bit also? We remember that he was made chairman of ECOWAS for at least 2 years. Is that what they mean when they say that he had a role in peace building in Africa or within the sub-region more particularly?
So we start with Liberia, where, compliments of Charles Taylor, the country descended into a very long civil war from December, in fact, Christmas Day, eve of Christmas 1989, Now, at the time, you would know that the PNDC was still in power. Unfortunately, this was at a time when he was under pressure to transition from revolution to democracy. Now, because of the economic constraints that I have alluded to, the Ghana Armed Forces were not very well endowed, and yet he managed, together with Nigeria, together with the Gambia, whose leader, Jawara, that's right, was the chair of ECOWAS at the time, to mobilize what became known as ECOMOG, to intervene with or without Charles Taylor's consent. They thought at the time that it was, of course, the pretext was that Ghana was going to evacuate Ghanaian citizens, and therefore the grounds was humanitarian. But of course, in the absence of a ceasefire or cessation of hostilities or peace agreement, Ghana and ECOMOG ended up undertaking a peace enforcement role. And in spite of many challenges, including difficulties with Nigeria, Ghana still stuck with ECOMOG until his chairmanship of ECOWAS, 1994. Now, 1994 is very, very critical. And I think Obeda Samoa has explained that in his book that I've mentioned. Ghana all along, subscribed to the doctrine of engaging with the players in Liberia to find an exit centered on elections. And Nigeria's approach was to use the military option in order to defeat Charles Taylor on the battlefield. It took all those years from August 1990, when ECOMOG went into Liberia, until about 1994-95, during the chairmanship of Rawlings as ECOWAS chairman, for ECOWAS now to realize that the military option was not going to work. So the only option then was Ghana's belief in the doctrine of engagement. So we would recall that at about 1994, 1995, 1996, we had the Accra and the Akosombo series of meetings, which created the conditions now. But of course here, regional politics come in. And Nigeria was not very happy that a small player like Ghana was going to take the credit for ending the conflict in Liberia. And so it continued slightly into 1996 when he had led the scene for the Abuja Accord now to cement peace. So that commitment to ECOMOG, and without Ghana, I should say, Nigeria's legitimacy, which was questioned as a pariah state, might have had implications for the conflict resolution efforts within Liberia. So Ghana's role was pivotal. And of course, we know that although Ghana was not very keen on going into Sierra Leone, it did, towards the latter stages of that conflict, join Nigeria in Sierra Leone. So a bit of the credit also goes to, J.J. Rawlings. But at the end of all of this, lessons had been learned during the conflicts in the Mano River area that laissez-faire attitude that was in the 1975 charter, where we needed to establish an allied armed forces of the community that we had paid blind glimpse of, now encourage the leadership of ECOWAS to craft, even during the conflict, the revised treaty of 1993, and immediately after the conflict in 1999, to establish the protocol relating to the mechanism for conflict prevention, management, resolution, and peacekeeping. Now, this mechanism, since its time till date, has been the instrument that ECOWAS has used to troubleshoot conflicts in Cote d'Ivoire, for instance, in the Gambia, I think 2016 or 2015 into 2016, around Yahya Jammeh and co, and of course, Guinea-Bissau, and so on and so forth. So a lot of the credit about regional stability, as we have it in the ECOWAS region today, must be credited to Rawlings. Of course, not in isolation, but in conjunction with other leaders of the member states of ECOWAS.
Right. So at his funeral, as you observed, the tributes were very, very, assuring. Even people that were his enemies, and President Akufo-Addo, didn't mince words about that. The fact that they didn't see eye to eye, and then later they began to build, a friendship that they became proud of. What do you have to say? Maybe finally, if you want to make a comment about that, the era that mostly we don't like to talk about because it's controversial, that in what he did in and called it the house cleaning exercise, how much of that takes away all that he's been, through him, the country, has achieved? There are those who believe that the things that happened, his arrest, and subsequently the court-martial, the manner he spoke, someone who was getting ready to be executed, and then the manner in which he got released, how he took the fault and said, let my men go, deal with me only, let me bear the guilt and the penalty all alone. What would you say that the excesses of the AFRC or the PNDC, what would you say they do to what he's been able to build, and now, without any contestation, we credit him for?
If I may attempt to sound a bit philosophical, the evil that men do lives after them, and the good is often interred with the bones.
That's right.
So these are the two extreme sides of the character, of the image, of the legacy of J.J. Rawlings. On the one hand, he navigated Ghana and ECOWAS as a region or sub-region from very difficult circumstances to the current, climate of, relative stability that we have. But on the other hand, that process or processes exacted a heavy toll on the well-being of many, many, many Ghanaians. Whether he apologized for that before he passed, I'm not too sure. But I get the sense that either he did it or he came close to doing it, But we also need to remind ourselves of the other side of this discourse. The idea that, look, painful as the revolution was to us as Ghanaians first and foremost, shouldn't that be the raison d'etre why we must be scared of the current climate of politics that we are practicing in this country, where we don't seem to be serious about the seriousness that governance entails, as if to ridicule what Rawlings had done, which we don't like, but rather use it as the basis to ensure that we don't go through that again. So I cannot speak for him, but I think all of us as Ghanaians, in a way, were complicit in what happened. Either we were part of it, or we were sitting on the lines, or it was because of our excesses, that caused this revolution to come on. So all of us need to apologize to the state of Ghana and learn lessons from that. But I think there is more about his humane side. And if you may allow me to mention just about 3. A few days ago, I posted on Facebook 4 drinks. 1 black label, 1 red label, 1 schnapp, and some very fine vodka. Now, sometime before I left as ceremonial lady, and remember I left I left Ghana for the OAU in 2000. Sometime before that, at a function at the Black Star Square or wherever, we had come to the castle, and I was about to salute and get ready to go back to Marks where, you know, I was staying and working. And he turned to his wife, said, Nana or Nana, can we give some of the drinks to Festus or Colonel Abuaje, let's say, and then ask W1 Tete to also give him some of the cakes. Of course, the cakes, I said, went long ago with my coffee and tea. But those 4 drinks, over 21 years old, are still here. You see, I say this because as ceremonial ADC, and indeed anybody who worked with him, would tell you straight away that you were not there to make money. You were not there to expect to be paid for your services. After all, I was in the employ of the Ghana Armed Forces. So that thoughtfulness to think that, oh, this guy has been following me, standing at attention, 45 minutes in excess when I was speaking, can I please show him a kind gesture? Now, during the funeral itself, because I was listening, I couldn't go there for some personal reasons. But I heard it said that up to a certain point in time, when a soldier misbehaved, it was what we call, I think you were a lawyer, so the summary trial, you know, chaired by the commanding officer. He was a sole judge and everything. He was a judge and he was a counsel, he was everything. During the revolution, Rawlings thought that, no, this was not fair. This was not justice. So he changed that from that summary trial led by a commanding officer to a disciplinary board composed of the CEO still as chair, but assisted by a number of other ranks. That's one. The third one is that for all those years when Ghana had been in peacekeeping, every year there were delegations that visited contingents, wherever they were, especially coinciding with medal days. And sometimes, now I'm saying this as a matter of fact, some of these delegations will go through London or have to go through London before going wherever they were. Now, the longer the number of days that you spent in transit until you got there, together with the number of days that you remained in the mission area, the bigger, the fatter, the larger the allowances that you collected. And sometimes those allowances were more than the allowances that the officers and men were taking for staying in the mission areas for 6 months. Of course, the soldiers complained, and Rawlings understood them. He said, no, this is not justice. This is not equity. So you now traveled in transit without any allowance, and then your days that you spend in the mission area entitled you to whatever other allowance that you had to collect. In fact, the allowance in the mission area from when you were in transit, you know. So these are some of the humane side of Rawlings that endeared him. In fact, the other one that I should mention, what we used to call the Batman, you know, and some of us, as officers, must admit that we were misusing the Batmen as if they were our servants. Look, some Batmen were washing the underpants of their wives, but they were there to only take care of the uniform of the officer. So during the revolution, which was one reason why many officers endured a lot of hardship, the soldiers paid us back. And Rawlings said, okay, enough is enough. From now onwards, no officer will be entitled to a soldier as a Batman. However, in lieu of the services that the Batman or Batman would have provided, I'm now going to give you an allowance. Till today, that allowance, I think, has been subsumed into the salaries of officers and warrant officers, who are the only ones who are entitled, I think, from warrant officer class 1, who are entitled to the services of a Batman. So this was somebody who cared, I think, as many people have said, less about himself and more about the people around him, for whose causes that he had sacrificed. But in the process, the fact remains, as you said, that it created a lot of pain, and many till today have found it very difficult to forget and forgive.
All right. Thank you so very much, Colonel Festus Abuaje, retired. He's author, conflict analyst, consultant, and adjunct member, Center on Democratic Transitions, Ghana. Thank you so very much indeed, sir. And
Thank you.
he's been sharing his knowledge of the legacy of President Rawlings, more particularly in the area of security. Of course, if we have to discuss Rawlings' legacy, we'll need perhaps, days to be doing that sort of, discussion. So we'll end it here. Send us messages about what you know or remember or wish he be remembered about, and we'll share them with the rest of the world.